everybody, welcome to our live and knitting event. My name is Brenda KB Anderson. I'm a designer and an instructor of crocheting and knitting and sewing and crafty things. And today I'm excited to share with you my method, one of my favorite methods actually, for making mittens. So these mittens, they're thick, they're warm, and they work up really quickly, and they don't use double point needles. You don't have to use two circular needles either, or the magic loop method or anything. They're just knit flat and then seam together. So before you're like, oh, I don't know about that seam, I just want to show you what it looks like. It looks very nice. This is the side seam right here on the side of our mittens, and I'll be showing you guys how to do that. And to me, this is just, I just really like working on straight needles. There's just something tactile about it that I just really love. I mean, of course, I make things on double point needles, and I actually, when I was looking back through the live events that I've been teaching and knitting, I noticed that I've been using a lot of double point needles in those, and I thought, you know what? Maybe it's time to change it up. Maybe I should just stay away from the double needles for just a little bit so that people who don't love double needles will have a fun project too. So this is a fun one. It just kind of flies off the needles because you're actually using two strands of worsted weight held together all at once to make a nice chunky yarn that's very warm. And so for me, that's kind of all those reasons snowball into why these are my favorite mittens. Plus, you get to use up scraps. So let me just show you a couple of the versions that I have here of mittens that we're making. Oh, and by the way, they're sized from like child all the way up through adult large, so they'll fit most of the people you know. And if you're trying to make these for littler hands, like preschool hands or you know, small kids, then you could try using this with like two strands of double DK weight held together, or just one strand of worsted weight and maybe like a fingering weight held together or something like that, and then smaller needles just to kind of downsize it just a little bit, because I did not. You know, I always like to test the different sizes and make sure that it's going to work, and I just wasn't feeling super confident about shrinking the pattern down to that small of a size without changing the thickness of the yarn. So, you know, feel free to alter it if you like, and if you're into that, that's fine too, but I just wanted to give you another option. Okay, so taking a look at these two mittens, these two versions that we have here, this is a child size, this is a big kid size. And this mitten here, this is the scrappier version, and I do have in the download, which is free to everyone, by the way. You'll see a link in the description for the download. If you want to follow along, you can go ahead and print that out, or take a look at it later. It'll be there later too if you want. But in the download, I do talk a little bit about gathering your yarn and kind of like some strategies on how to use up your scraps, because I love using scraps, and I just wanted to make sure that I explained kind of how I got these different visuals that you're going to be seeing here. So this one is the scrappier version, and this mitten is just made with one color throughout the whole mitten, and then you add in little colors here and there just at whim. It could be at the end of a row, could be right in the middle of a row. It doesn't really matter. And I'll be showing you kind of how I like to switch colors, especially when you're switching colors a lot, you don't want to have a gazillion ends to weave in later. So I'm going to show you my method of doing that as we're working through this, you know, once we get to the sample where we're working on this. This version right here, this is like a different color strategy here, as you can see. I used 3 different colors. So like this darker kind of purpley brownish color, and then a sort of a burgundy red, and then this lighter pink. And then by holding them with different strands held together, you can kind of create this sort of marled looking ombre situation here. So you start out with 2 strands of the darker, then you swap out 1 strand of the darker for the red, for this little section. Then you're with 2 strands of the red, then you swap out 1 strand of the red for the pink and work up through here, and then eventually you end up with 2 strands of the pink. So your pattern does describe how I did these and kind of switched out and about when you're going to be switching to another color, just to kind of give you an idea. I'm not telling everybody like you need to change at this row or this, you know, because I want you guys to be able to use your scraps. I wanted this to feel like a project where you can kind of like wing it just a little bit with the colors and the yarn scraps that you're using up. But I do have lots of hints in your pattern download kind of explaining these two different methods and kind of how these were done, so that if you really want more detailed explanation on the color changing, we've got that. But I'll kind of be talking about it a little bit as we're working our way through this process. Mostly though, I'm going to be spending a little more time just showing you how to create the mittens, the stitches that we need, the increases, the decreases, working up the thumb and all that kind of stuff, and how to do the seam at the end. All right, so I welcome you guys to, ask me questions if there's something that doesn't make sense or you need me to clarify something a little bit more. And I already see a bunch of hellos coming in. We've got a hello from Pam, and we've got another hello from Susan Mai. And Sandy's back. Hi, Sandy. I'm glad you're here. And thank you for the compliment on my sweater from Susan Mai, or me. I'm not sure how to pronounce it. Oh, and I see Cindy's here from snowy central Pennsylvania. Hi, Cindy. It's good to see you. They're in here. Perfect day for a mitten. Yeah, exactly. It's very snowy here, actually. And we've got a greetings from snowy Michigan. Hello. Welcome, everybody. Okay. So for the most part, I'm going to be using these straight needles, but I do have another set of needles here later. I just want to point this out in case I forget to talk about this. These needles are basically a straight needle, but it just has a little cord on the end, so that way you can knit something longer and it can kind of sit in your lap. It does not need to be a circular needle. So I just wanted to kind of explain that in case I forget about that once we get to this point here. But I'm going to be using straight needles, and they are US 8, which is a 5mm knitting needle. And I like these little short ones because I just feel like they're just, I don't know, they just feel nice as I'm working up my mittens, but of course you can use whatever length you happen to have. You can use circular needles if that's what you like or what you have. You're just going to be knitting back and forth in those turned rows. Or if you happen to have double point needles and you don't have straight needles, you can always put like a rubber band or a stopper on the end and use them as though they are straight needles, if that helps. All right, and then we're going to be needing a variety of colors of worsted weight. I'm using a wool. I'm using 100% wool, and I have grown to really, really love using a non-superwash wool for my mittens, because as you wear them, as you work in them, shovel, sled, whatever you're doing in the winter, it starts to felt that wool, and it really makes them a lot warmer, and I just really really love that aspect of a feltable wool. But I realize not everybody is a wool user. You could certainly substitute with acrylic. You can use 2 strands of acrylic yarn. Whatever fiber you'd like to substitute. Alpaca would be really nice as well. That would be very warm. But basically you just need 2 strands of worsted weight yarn held together. And I do have like yardage amounts suggestions in your pattern download per whatever size it is that you're making. All right, so we're going to start out our project. You're going to cast on anywhere from, I believe, 28 to, let me check, from 28 to 36 stitches, just depending on the size that you are making. So I'm going to start out making the smallest size here. I've already got 20 stitches cast on. I have just 8 more to cast on here, and I am using the German twisted cast on, which I really love because it's stretchy and it has a really nice edge, but you can use any cast on that you like, as long as it has enough stretch for you to get your hand through. This is going to be the bottom edge of your ribbing. You just need, I've used the long tail cast on for these before, and that works plenty. That works completely fine. Okay, so we've got 20 stitches cast on here, and we're gonna cast on 8 more. So I know the website has instructions on how to do the German twisted cast on, but you can hold it with the 2 strands of yarn coming from the ball are right here, and then I've got the 2 ends right here, and I started maybe about a yard away from the edge, making my loop, slipping it onto my needle, and then I started casting everything on. So I'm going to hold this in like slingshot position like this, and I'm going to duck my needle under here, go over the top, grab that, go down through here, and pull it through that little triangle. This is just sort of like a refresher for those of you who don't remember how to do the German twisted cast on, or if you're interested in learning this, you can certainly go check this out. on the website if you need a more detailed explanation. So I think I just cast on 3. I better count these. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, 23. All right, I've got 5 more to cast on. 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. All right, so I've got all my stitches cast on, and I'm going to start working my first row. So to create these mittens, as we're working them flat, I like to slip the first stitch and then I purl the last stitch, and you'll see as we work through this what I mean, but this is going to create a nice selvage for us to stitch to on both edges of our fabric, because we're not making a tube because we're making it flat. Here, let me pull this in here. So I just wanted to create a nice selvage to stitch to along here and here, and then we'll also be doing that along the thumb, which is also worked flat as well. So just a little heads up there. All right, so we are going to start with slipping the first stitch as though we're going to knit it. So the yarn should be in back, and you're just going to slip it to the right needle. Then we're going to knit the next stitch and purl the next stitch. And then we're going to repeat the knit and purl all the way across, okay? Because we're doing a 1-by-1 ribbing, so we've got a knit, purl, knit, purl, knit, purl, knit, purl. We're just going to do this all the way across. And for those of you who are not, not super comfortable reading a pattern, you do really need to have, be referencing this pattern for this project, because there's a whole bunch of different sizes. So I'm not going to be calling out certain numbers of stitches or repeats or anything like that. I'm just showing you like the method of creating these mittens to kind of help you through the pattern. But I did put a link in the pattern download that you can follow if you're unsure about how to read a pattern, or like what all those parentheses mean and all that kind of stuff. I did make a video. This is actually for crochet, but all the same like parentheses and all that kind of stuff still applies to knitting. So I did put a link in there for that in case you need a little bit of extra help understanding your pattern. So just know that that's in there. All right, I have just a few stitches left. Knit, purl, knit, purl, and then there's one more stitch left, and we're going to purl that last stitch. We're going to do another purl. So there's 2 purls in a row at the end of that row. Okay? Then we're going to turn our work and knit across another row. So to start this again, sorry, we're not knitting all the way across. We're just going to work across the next row. So we're going to slip the first stitch as though we're going to knit it. So you're going to come in from left to right, grab that stitch and slip it onto your right hand needle. And then you're going to knit the next stitch, purl the next stitch again. So this is the same exact thing that we did on the last row. So knit, purl, knit, purl, knit, purl. Okay, so you can start to see that ribbing forming there, and you're going to continue all the way across to the end. And just note again, you're going to be working a purl here and then another purl at the end. Okay, so 2 purls in a row at the end. All right, and so you're going to do that for a total of 13 rows, regardless of the size that you're making. So you're going to make a piece that looks like this. Okay, so 1-by-1 ribbing. And you're just remembering to slip the first stitch knitwise, the yarn and back, and then when you get to the very last stitch, make it a purl stitch, even though you just did one previous to that. All right, so let's see. So I have worked my 13 rows of my ribbing here. So this is the cuff. And then I'm going to add another strand of yarn in here just to kind of change up the color. I'm going to add a blue. And so to do that, I'm going to drop one of these two strands. I guess let's see. Yeah, it doesn't really matter which one I drop. I am going to, because I gave myself a nice long yarn tail, I'm not worried about having a yarn tail to stitch this up. If you didn't give yourself a nice long yarn tail, if you don't have enough to sew along the cuff, then you may want to just cut your yarn end so that's long enough so that you have that as a yarn tail later. But I am not going to use it as a yarn tail. I am just going to go ahead and break my yarn about 8 inches in or so, and I'm going to show you how I'm going to add the next color. So this is the method that I really like to use, especially for the scrappy mittens, because it just helps to minimize the amount of ends that you have to weave in. So I'm just going to grab that new color. I'm just going to hold it along with both of these strands, and we're actually going to be knitting with 3 strands at a time for just a little while. Because you know what? It's not going to show up, and it's just going to make your mitten warmer, and then you don't have to weave in those ends. Okay, so here we are at the very first stitch, and now we are starting on the hand thumb gusset. Okay, so this, let me see how many stitches I've got here. I think I've got, let's see, 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, 14, 16, 18, 20, 22, 24, 26, 28, 30, 32. Okay, so I am making the adult small version right here, right now. And I'm going to slip the first stitch knitwise, and then I'm going to knit the next stitch. And so I'm just hanging on to all 3 of those strands together. So knit the next one, and just continue knitting until you have knit. For this size, this would be row 1 of the hand thumb gusset. I'm going to be doing 14 knit stitches after I slipped that one. So slip 1, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. And there's my little yarn tail. I've used up all that little length of yarn, so I'm just going to let that hang out on the inside of my mitten, so behind my work. Let's see, 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14. Okay, so now we're going to start adding extra stitches right in the middle here if that's going to create our thumb gusset. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to make one left, and the way that I like to do this, and this helps me remember how to actually make the stitch, is when it says make one left, I use my left hand needle and I place it underneath that strand between stitches, and then I'm going to knit the back loop of this stitch. Okay, so I'm just going to use my right needle to knit the back of it. That's a make one left, and then we're going to place a stitch marker right here. This is going to help us remember to make those increases. We're only going to be making increases on the right side rows. I'm going to place a stitch marker here, then I'm going to knit the next 2 stitches, 1 and 2, and then I'm going to make one right. So when I make one right, I'm going to use my right hand needle. I'm going to place it from front to back, and then I'm just going to drop it off on my left hand needle here, and then I'm going to knit the front of it. So when you do these make one stitches, whether you knit the front or the back, it's going to be twisting that loop, and that keeps a hole from happening right there. So if you're getting a hole, that means you're not twisting your stitch. Okay, and then we're going to knit the remaining stitches until you get to the very last stitch, and then we're going to purl 1. So you will have a different number of stitches to work here before you get to those increases, just depending on the size that you're making. So you're going to have to refer to your pattern to tell you how many stitches you're knitting before you start making those increases. All right, we've got 1 stitch left, and I'm going to make a purl like that. And then I'm going to get rid of that because it's making noise. I'm going to pick up my other needle. And then we're going to turn our work, and we're going to work a wrong side row. And when we're working the wrong side row, we're again going to slip that first stitch as though we're knitting it, and then we're going to purl across. And to do that, we have to bring our yarn to the front. Okay, so after we slip the stitch, we bring the yarn between the needles and bring it to the front. and then we're going to purl all the way across, ending with that last stitch as a purl. I better catch up on my hellos here. Oh, we've got lots of people piping in. Oh, you guys, thanks for the compliments about my sweater. I see another one in there too. Oh, see, Wolfpack says, suggest that with the ombre to end with the darkest color since the fingers tend to get dirtiest most quickly. That is a great suggestion, yes. That did occur to me after I knitted these ones with the light pink on the tips. And I was like, I should have done that the opposite way. I was thinking about more for how I wanted it to look, but really I think it would have looked great the other way around too. That's a very good suggestion. Thank you, Cindy. Especially for children. Yes, exactly. Totally true. Oh, we have a hi from France. Hello. And a hi from very snowy Illinois. And we've got Hobby Troll says hello, hello. Would one strand of bulky weight work? Yes, I think so. Just test out to make sure that you're getting the gauge. And actually, if I'm being honest, I've got a little loop here. Oh, that's because that's where my yarn tail ended and I switched to the next color. It was just kind of tucked into my work. So when I have these little bits, when I switch from one color to the next, I just leave it hanging out here because it doesn't bother me. I leave it about 3/4 of an inch or an inch long, and eventually, because these are wool, it'll kind of felt to the inside and we don't have to worry about it. If you want to, of course, you can leave it a little longer and weave it in, a couple of stitches if you want to. But we worked all those 3 yarns together for a very long time. It's not gonna start unraveling or anything like that. You just don't want it to poke to the front of your work, which could happen. But if you make it in wool, it'll kind of felt to the inside. Let's see. Yes, I think the bulky weight would work just fine, or a chunky weight maybe. So do a little test and make sure that your mitten's turning out the size you want it to be. I mean, if I'm being honest, whenever I'm making a small project like a mitten, I just sort of start on it and then just keep monitoring the size of it as I'm working on it and seeing if it's turning out the expected size instead of making a separate gauge swatch. I'm not saying you shouldn't swatch, I'm just saying it's okay as long as it's okay not to swatch as long as you treat what you're making as the swatch and you don't just sort of blindly keep going on your mitten hoping it's going to turn out the right size without checking anything. Okay, so we've done that first row of purling. And now I have a nice little knot in my yarn. And then we're going to keep working on that thumb gusset. So we're going to slip that first stitch knitwise, and then we're going to knit all the way across until we get to right before that first stitch marker. All right, so, I think I forgot to place the second stitch marker. I did. Okay, so here's right before that first stitch marker. We're gonna knit right up to it. And then again, we're going to do a make one left. So we're gonna go from front to back underneath that strand in between our stitches. And then we are going to knit the back of it. So that's gonna create that twist in the loop right there. Then we're gonna slip our stitch marker and untangle our yarn. Woo. There we go. That'll get us through part of this. All right. Slip our stitch marker. Then we're going to knit 2, and that's where our next stitch marker should be, right there, because we're always going to have our stitch markers are going to be separated by just 2 stitches right there. All right, so then we're going to slip our stitch marker over. So I'm going to add one here since I forgot to put it in there, or maybe it fell out. There we go. And then we're going to do a make one right. So I'm going to take my right needle, go in, and I'm going to drop this off onto my left needle. Then I'm going to knit the front of it, and that's going to create that twist, like that. And then we go ahead and knit all the way across until we have one stitch left, and then we purl that last stitch. Okay, there's our last stitch. We're going to purl that stitch. All right. And so this is basically how we're going to be increasing on the right side rows and then just working purls all across the backs, the wrong side rows, sorry. And don't forget to slip the first stitch knitwise and purl the last stitch always. So you're going to do that for the required amount of rows. And for most sizes, you will have a couple of rows that you work even, and then you'll do one more set of increases. Okay, so before we split off for the thumb, but you'll have to follow the pattern. Let me just show you in here where I mean. So here we just did this. This was the very first increase row we did. Then we purled across. Then we did another increase row here, and then we would purl across again. Here's another increase row. So these are for all of the stitches. I mean, all of the sizes, sorry. And we purl across, and then here's another increase row, purl across, and another increase row, purl across, okay? So, and then for the child size small and adult size small, adult medium, adult large only, then we work this section here, okay? So that's not for the child, the big kid size is not included here. I'm just gonna point that out. And then, but the big kid size comes back in here. Okay, so if this is seeming confusing to you, I'm just pointing this out that you need to be looking at these headings and seeing if this pertains to your sizes. And if this is confusing, then follow that link and then you can learn a little bit more about reading patterns or following a pattern. But basically you're going to be on right side rows increasing for the thumb gusset. On wrong side rows, you're gonna be purling across, except for that first stitch which you slip, until you've worked the required amount of rows. And then, here we go. Let me pull this over here. Oops. Okay. So you can see what's happening here. We've done all those increases right here in the middle. You can see that those are those two little marked stitches. And we are about to do the row that is the dividing and working the thumb all sizes, okay? There we go. So we are going to work, we're going to slip the first stitch knitwise as usual. And then we are going to, for this size, we're going to knit 15, but you'll knit however many, pertains to your size here. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15. And then we're going to place a marker right here because we're basically going to be marking a little section where we're going to be working the thumb back and forth in turned rows. Okay, so we place our marker and then we're going to slip one knitwise. You can actually knit that stitch. It doesn't really matter which way you want to do it, but I was just keeping consistent with my pattern there. So I'm slipping that knitwise to follow the pattern. And then we're going to knit 12 stitches. So 1, 2, 3, 4. Oh, I think I must be making a different size because, let me just check here. Yeah, I think I was supposed to only knit 14. Let me just check how many stitches I have. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, Yep. I am going to, 1, 2, 3, 4. Oh, okay, I know what I did. Okay, so I actually needed to add one more increase here after I worked even, which I didn't realize. So I had done my increasing for the thumb gusset. I thought I was a little further ahead in this sample, but I'm going to go ahead and work this last group of increases for the thumb gusset, and then we'll be on track here. So here I'm doing my, oops, I'm going to go back because I slipped that other stitch. Let's see. We're just going to unknit back to that stitch that I slipped earlier. Here it is. There we go. Okay, so we're going to knit all the way up until we got to our marked stitch, or the in between our marked stitches there. So that's right here. So we're going to make one left. So we're going to tuck our left needle in, and we're going to knit the back loop, and then we're going to knit 2 stitches. And then we get to the next stitch marker, and we're going to make one right. So I'm placing my right needle in, dropping it off on the left. Actually, I should slip that marker. Make one right, knit through the front loop, and then we're going to knit across. All right, and then and then once we finish that next row, we will be back on track. I just didn't have enough, I realized my mistake because I didn't have quite enough stitches, and I realized my thumb was not going to be centered. That's what was going on there. I had forgotten to do that last set of increases in the thumb. So that's a good lesson to count up your stitches before you start dividing for the thumb. Make sure you're on track. All right, so there's our last stitch. That's a purl. Now we're going to purl all the way across. We're going to do that very first stitch as a slip stitch, bring the yarn to the front or to the side facing us, and we're going to purl our way across. And then we'll be ready to do that dividing for the thumb. Let me just catch up here. Would a 1x2 or a 2x2 ribbing work also? I tend to adjust so that I don't have to flip the yarn so much, just personal preference. Yes, you could do, well, you'll have to check, not all the size, I think you could cast on extra in order to do the 2x2 ribbing and then just decrease because not all of the sizes, depending on the size you're making, 2x2 ribbing, you might end up with not the right amount of stitches, because that would 2x2 ribbing would be like you'd have the 2 selvage stitches, and then you would have groups of 4 because it's 2x2. So that might not work out. You'd have to, for some of the sizes. But you can always cast on 2 extra stitches and then just either decrease those or actually just do fewer increases probably when you're doing your thumb gusset. That would work fine too. I mean, like 2 stitches difference isn't going to really make that much of a difference, especially because this ribbing is so stretchy. So I wouldn't worry about the cuff being just a tiny bit bigger. If that makes sense. Hope that makes sense. All right, so we are nearing the end of our purling here. Wrong side row. There we go. And then we're going to turn our work. And now we are actually ready to do that, that working the thumb back and forth. And I think I will throw in another color here. So I'm just going to, again, just break my yarn. And then we're going to knit with 3 colors for a little while until we run out of the one that I just broke, if that makes sense. Okay, so we're going to slip that first stitch, and then I'm going to knit, let's see, 15 stitches. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, and 15. And we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Okay, so that seems right. So we're going to place our stitch marker right there. Okay, after we've knit our 15 or however many stitches your pattern tells you to work. And then we are going to slip the next stitch and we're going to knit across 10, or actually 12. It just depends on what, let's see, what size you are making. So this would be 12. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Oops, once again. It's just between where. Okay, I just realized I'm actually working one size smaller than I thought I was. So this is not the adult small, this is the big kid size. So we've got slip the first stitch, and then 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. We'll remove that stitch marker. 7, 8, 9, and 10. And then we're going to purl 1. And then right there, that's where we're going to place our marker. So basically, depending on the size that you're working, you're either going to be knitting, so you slip the first stitch and then you're either knitting 10 or you're knitting 12, or for the very largest size you'd be knitting 14, and then you do a purl and then you place another marker, okay? And then we're going to begin working this section between the markers back and forth in turned rows to create that thumb. So I'm going to turn my work, sliding that stitch marker back over here. And then this very first stitch, I'm going to bring the yarn around to the back and slip it knitwise. And then I'm going to bring the yarn to the front and we're going to purl across, all the way across. Well, across until we get to the stitch marker because we're just working those thumb stitches right now. There we go. We're going to turn our work. Oops, there was one more stitch. Got to knit that, or purl that last stitch there. All right, now we're going to turn our work. And we're going to slip that first stitch knitwise. And we're going to knit across until we have one stitch left before the marker. And we're going to purl that stitch. And there's our last stitch there. So we're going to purl that. Turn our work. Bring the yarn to the back. Slip that first stitch as though to knit. Bring the yarn to the front and purl across. So we're basically just working this back and forth in turn rows. And there'll be a, different number of rows that you work here depending on, of course, what size you're making. Long enough, but I'll just do one more and then we'll move on to the last row in the thumb, or the last two rows rather. Okay, so there's our last stitch. We're going to purl that, turn our work, and then we're going to purl across. So we bring the yarn to the back, slip as if to knit, bring it to the front, purl across. And then when you have worked the proper amount of rows, you're going to be, let me show you where we're at here. Okay, so you're going to repeat 2 and 3. 2 and 3 are just 2 is a purl row, 3 is a knit row, and then you finish up here the next row with a purling across, which is what we just did. And then we're going to do the very last row where we're basically just knitting 2 together across this row to kind of bring in the top of the thumb. Now I should have actually 2 more rows in here, but just for the sake of time, I'm going to skip those 2 rows. So I'm going to slip the first stitch, and then we're going to knit 2 together. So here's our 2 stitches. We're just going to place our needle in from left to right through both those stitches. We're just knitting them as though they were 1 stitch. We're just kind of cramming them close together and knitting them together. We're going to do that across the thumb until we have only 1 stitch left, and then we will knit that last stitch. You know we've been purling the last stitch, but we don't have to do another row after this, so we're just going to knit it. So we just knit all the way across. We're going to knit that last stitch, and then we're going to cut our yarn. So give yourself, you know, a nice long yarn tail, like 12 inches or more, I would say. And then we are going to use a yarn needle. I'm going to turn this around this way. And we're going to use our yarn needle to bring this yarn tail through all of those live loops. So that last row of just the thumb, of course. I'm just going to pull them off and pull it through. Now this is going to look a little bit short. This thumb is just a little short here, but that's okay. And then I like to run this through a second time, run it through all the same loops just one more time. Just like that, and pull it tight, and then it tends to stay. And then I just leave this hanging out there for now, okay, until later, and we're gonna use that to sew the thumb together later. But I don't do that until later. The thing I really love about this method of making mittens is that you get the thumb out of the way really before you even finish the rest of the hand, which I love because you normally when you're making mittens, you know, on double point needles, you know, whether it's, well, if it's from the cuff up, then you end up having to go back in there and then make that little thumb while the hand is kind of hanging out. And it's always just sort of awkward when you have little double point needles and you're trying to knit right next to the hand that's just dangling there. So I particularly like this method because, you know, you get that thumb out of the way and then, you know, you don't have to worry about it. Okay, so we're gonna make sure for this mitten, I wanted to use the same 2 colors as I did on this row because we basically worked across here and then we got all sort of like distracted by the thumb for a while, right? But we never completed our row. So that's what we're gonna do right here. We're just going to lay that strand of yarn or 2 strands of yarn in there. I'm going to remove that stitch marker because we don't need it anymore. And we're going to go ahead and just knit across until there's 1 stitch left, and then we will purl that stitch. And I like to leave a nice long yarn tail here just in case we need anything extra for seaming. We should have enough with that last yarn tail at the thumb, but I just like to add a little extra just in case. All right, so we're knitting across until we have 1 stitch left. And then we're going to purl that last stitch. And then we'll turn our work. And so far, these are not connected right here. You can see there's just a big hole, but we're going to connect it on this row. So we're going to slip the first one as if to knit, and then we're going to bring the yarn to the front so we can purl across. Let's see, we've got, we have a hi, sorry I'm late. It's okay, you're never considered late really because you can always go back and watch it. I'm glad you're here though. Cindy says, are you familiar with Lopi worsted yarn? What do you think of using it? I have never used that yarn, but I keep hearing people talking about it. And I am, yes, so if somebody has used it, please chime in here and let us know how you like it. I know it's supposed to be really warm, but I have never used it. I have not had the pleasure of using that, but yeah, I've been wanting to though. Jeanette says, I might give these a try. I've always wanted to make mittens. Awesome. This is a great beginner mitten pattern, I feel like, because you know, you don't have to worry about the double point needles while you're just trying to figure out kind of the anatomy of a mitten and you know, how to make the thumb and all that kind of stuff. Okay, so we've purled all the way across. We've got another stitch here to purl, and this one tends to get a little stretched out because that's where we added that extra strand of yarn. I'm just pulling that stitch marker out. See, here's where we had added the new strand of yarn when we started working across the second half of that last row. So I'm going to give that a little bit of a tug as we go by, and then we're going to bring this right up next to our other loops and just continue purling right across. And I always like to make that first purl stitch, you know, after you jump across where the thumb is, nice and tight. Just kind of yank on it a little bit to make it nice and tight there. And then we'll just continue our way across. And I've got, let's see, just a couple more stitches here, and then we're gonna leap ahead. There we go. Okay. So now you can see we have knit, this is now connected all the way across, okay, above where the thumb is. And so you just kind of, you know, keep the thumb out of the way, and you're gonna knit back and forth for the required number of rows for your size. And we'll jump across here to this sample here. This is one of the kids, this is the small child size mitten. And I have almost worked the required number of rows. I just have one more to do, so I'm going to turn my work, and I am switching to another color. That's why I left it here. Also, I kind of wanted to show you what the inside of this looks like. I just leave these little guys hanging out here, and they just felt to the inside. If you're using a wool, if you're using an acrylic, you may, you know, if they bother you to have those longer strands in there, you might want to just kind of tuck them in. But I feel like, you know, we knit for quite a ways, like a large number of stitches. You know, when we break our yarn tail, leave it, you know, 8 inches or so, and you're going to knit with that while you add that third strand. And then, you know, it's not going to go anywhere. It's not going to undo. All right, I'm going to grab this color. And I'm just going to hold these three together. So I'm just kind of laying this up here next to it. And we're going to slip that first stitch, knitwise, and oops, I should have had this in the back when I did that. There we go. Holding it in back. Slip that stitch. And then we're going to, holding all three of those yarns together, bring them up to the front in between the needles, and then we're going to go ahead and purl all the way across. So this is my last row of working, basically working even before we start doing the shaping for the top of the fingers. All right, there's that little end, and we'll just let that sit on the inside of our mitten. Continuing our way across. So I'm wondering how you guys feel about double point needles. I was wondering that before I designed this project, because I know some people aren't big fans. And they like to use 2 circular needles or the magic loop method, or, you know, or possibly knitting their mittens flat like this. I'm just curious if anybody else was interested in working on these mittens because they didn't involve double point needles, or if you just kind of were interested in making some mittens. All right, so we worked our way all the way across, making those purl stitches, and now we're ready to start doing our decreases. Let's see. Okay, haven't read the pattern yet, but it looks like the mittens worked flat and then stitched together. Yes, Sandy, it is. Yep, you can see it here. It's flat. Even the thumb is flat, even though it doesn't look like it's flat. It's knit flat. And then we're going to be seaming those together. And I'm going to show you how to do that seam in just a little bit. Oh, Cindy says, love this, and I don't like picking up the stitches to finish the thumb. It's brilliant. Yes, I think even more so than working on straight needles, it's the thumb thing that I love so much about this method. Okay, hope this isn't too off topic, as I realize you don't need to bind off a lot on this mitten, but if you were doing a fingerless mitt, what would you recommend to pair with the German twisted cast on? I've tried 2x2 rib. but would like something stretchier. You know, usually on my fingerless mittens, I do like a twisted rib on the tip because I like there to be some stretch, but I don't like it to get all stretched out on the finger opening. So you could look into trying that. Yeah, or if other people have suggestions on what you should try or their favorite way to make the ribbing on the top of their fingerless mittens. Oh, Cindy has worked with the little. I'm not sure how to say it. Little Lopi. I'm not sure how to say it. Yes, I made hats with it. It's yeah. Icelandic yarn has wonderful properties for winter accessories. Okay. Oh, it's a double fleece yarn, so it has 2 types of fibers. Oh, okay. All right. Thanks, Cindy. See, this is why I love working in a group like this. Okay, so we've purled our way across, and we're ready to start those decreases. We're going to start out again, slipping that first stitch. And then our first decrease is going to be a slip, slip, knit. So we're going to slip this knit as though we're knitting it, slip the next stitch as though we're knitting it, and then we're going to knit through the back loop. So place that right back on there, and we're going to knit those 2 together like that. And we'll be doing that again. And then we're going to knit the required number of stitches. Let's see. I am just going to knit across to where I know it makes sense because I can't remember the amount of stitches for this size. But if you aren't quite sure, if you follow, see right on either side of the thumb, there's 2 stitches right there. Those 2 are the very center of the fold. Okay, so this is the middle. I'm just going to follow this up and place a stitch marker here. You don't have to do this. You'll have like a certain amount of stitches you're supposed to knit across in the pattern. But if you lost track in your pattern somewhere else, or you don't want to look it up right now, like me, you can just follow that little space between, where the 2 stitches on either side of where we made that thumb go, and then put a little stitch marker there. And then you're going to knit across until there are 2 stitches left, and then we're going to knit 2 together. So to knit 2 together, we're going to just place them right next to each other and knit them as though they were 1 loop. Okay, just like that. Then we can switch that stitch marker over to this side, and then we're going to slip, slip, and then knit through the back. And then we're going to knit across until there are 3 stitches left. All right, here's my 4th. Now I've got 3 stitches left, and we're going to knit 2 together. So just put them right next to each other and knit them as though they were 1. And then we've got that very last stitch right here, and I'm going to purl that. All right. Now we're going to turn our work, and we're going to purl across. And because oh yeah, we'll just leave that hanging out there. We'll tuck that in later. That was from when we joined our new color. So I'm going to go ahead and slip that first one, bring that yarn to the side we're looking at, and we're going to purl our way across. All right, and because we're running a little short on time, I think I will just kind of talk you through the rest of the decreases since I already showed them to you here on that first row. They're all very similar after that. It's all the same decreases. So let me get to the end of my row. There we go. and then you would just, let's see, on our next row, I want to see if we actually do another decrease. No, we just work even for 2 rows. Okay, so when you start your decreases, we did that first row of decreasing, and then we did a purl row, right? So we have our first row of decreasing here, then we did a purl row. Then we have 2 more rows where we work even. So we would just knit across, then purl on back. Remember to slip that first stitch and purl the last stitch. So you'll just do 2 more rows, and then you will do your decreases again. Okay, so your decreases, you're gonna slip that first stitch, you're gonna decrease right away, you're gonna knit across until there are 2 stitches left before that marker, then you'll knit them together, knit 2 together. Then you will slip your marker and do a slip, slip, knit right here, knit your way across, and then you will purl, or knit 2 together right here, and then purl that very last stitch, okay? And then on a wrong side row, you just slip the first stitch knitwise, purl all the way across. Okay, so you'll follow your pattern, making those decreases. It's really only after that first row of decreases that you work 2 rows even. After that, you're going to do another purl row and then a decrease row, a purl row, and then depending on the size you're working on, you may do another decrease row. But you will, on your very last decrease row, so every time you're working a wrong side row, you're just gonna be purling, right side rows, you're decreasing. On your very last decrease row, you're going to double up your decreases because that makes the decrease rate, it's gonna make the tip of your mitten come in a little faster right at the very tip. So if this was your last row, you would slip the first stitch, then you would do 2 decreases right in a row, 2 slip, slip, knit, 2 slip, slip, knits. Okay, so that would be working over 4 stitches. So slip, slip, knit these 2 stitches, slip, slip, knit these 2 stitches. Then you may have 1 or 2 stitches to knit, and then you do knit 2 together, slip the marker, slip, slip, knit, knit 1 or 2 stitches, depending on your size, and then knit 2 together, and then the very last stitch, you can just go ahead and knit. Okay, you don't have to purl that very last stitch. Then you have a piece that looks like this. Okay, and then you can cut your yarn and give yourself a nice long yarn tail, like however long. I mean, I have a very high tolerance for sewing with a long piece of yarn. If that drives you nuts, don't cut it so long as I am. I like to cut it like a yard long, which seems a little crazy. But I'm used to it. But if you want something a little shorter, that's totally fine. And actually, for this particular mitten, I didn't need to cut it so long now that I look at this, because only this section I'll be stitching together in this color, and then I'll probably switch to the red for this section down here. So we're going to take these 2 strands of yarn and thread them onto your yarn needle. Oops. All right. And then you can go ahead, this is just like what we did for the thumb, you're just going to run that needle through all of the remaining stitches. And once you go through them, you can, of course, drop them off the needle. There we go. Okay, so we're just going to pull that nice and tight until it closes up at the top. And I'm going to run this through that same, I like to go through here twice just for durability. So I'm just sending my needle back through the same path as before, like that. And now when I pull through, it'll stay closed a little bit better. Okay, so that's going to be what the top of your mitten looks like. And then I would recommend blocking your mitten. I didn't do that here, but blocking it will keep it from curling quite so much. See how this wants to just curl up. It can be a little bit frustrating when you're sewing it if it's curling it, especially if you're not a super experienced sewer. So I would recommend just getting it wet, squeezing out the water, laying it flat to dry, just kind of shaping it and laying it flat to dry. Or you could just steam block it if you don't, if you don't have time to wait for your mitten to dry. I'm not going to block it. I'm just going to place my finger in between the two layers because that tends to help me see what I'm doing. Oh, and so when you look at this edge, you'll see all these elongated V's. Those are those slipped stitches there, kind of stretched out. We're going to be stitching through the loop that's closest to the right side of the mitten. See how it wants to roll to the inside here? So if you're looking at it in this direction, here's the wrong side, here's the right side. We're going to be working under the loops the side of the V that is closest to the right side of our work, or that's really on the right side of our work. So what we're going to do is we're going to run our needle just through that first loop, and we're going to go through its neighboring loop right here. Okay, so this is the next loop over. Then we're going to come back across the gap here and go through the loop that's directly across it, like that. And then we're going to go into loop of 4. So this is sort of like a back stitch in a way. And this is going to get us started here. And we're going to pull those closer together. All right, so now we're going to go, when I say forward, I mean we're going to go in the next stitch as we're traveling, as we're stitching towards that side. So this would be forward. We're going to go in the next stitch forward and the stitch directly across, like that. And then we're going to go in the next stitch forward from this side and the next stitch across. And now we're going to go in the next stitch back. So then we're going to go forward through the place where we already stitched, forward into the next pair of stitches, and back. Forward and forward and back. Forward and forward. Again, we're just catching those loops that are closest to the right side, or this side too. When you look at the V, there's 2 legs. It's going to be the leg that's right next to all those other V's. Okay, and back. So basically the pattern is forward, forward, and back. So when I say forward, I mean we're going in the direction we're trying to travel. Forward, forward, and back. And the reason I do this particular seam is because it's pretty flat, it blends in, you can barely see it, and it is very sturdy, and all that stitching makes it a little thicker so you don't, because these stitches are kind of elongated where we slipped them to make them nice and tidy, they get kind of elongated. I don't like that they look like they just have big holes there, so that's why I'm doing this kind of unusual stitch. And actually, I don't even know if there's a name for this stitch. This is just something that I've always done. There probably is some sort of name. It's kind of like a back stitch, but I don't know. So forward, forward, and back. All right, so we would just keep sewing with that strand. And you should end up, I don't normally pin it because you should have the same amount of stitches on each side. However, I do think it is a good idea if you have like really obvious color changes to put a couple of stitch markers in there, just, especially if you're newer to sewing, just to keep track of where things are at and to make sure you didn't skip a stitch or something and then end up with a piece that's going to be shifted off to the side. So, a couple of, like maybe one right at the bottom, one right here where the ribbing stops, And then if you have like obvious color changes that you want to try to match up, then you can go ahead and place those stitch markers there to kind of hold it in place. But here, let me show you what this seam looks like. So that's the seam on the outside. It's pretty low profile. It doesn't look very bumpy or anything. And it'll even improve more after the blocking. And this is what it looks like on the inside. You just have those two kind of leftover loops that we had from those the slip stitches at the beginnings of our rows right there. Okay, and then you would do the exact same thing for this thumb. You would seam it in the same way, forward, forward, back, forward, forward, back, all the way down to here. And then generally when you have a thumb, really, for any kind of mitten, you always want to look around in there and see if there's any kind of gaps, and just sort of stitch back and forth and sew those up a little bit, just kind of get rid of any little holes that there might be. So just continue that on down and seam it up. And so, yeah, and that is it, really. It's not, the seaming part, you know, once you kind of get in the rhythm, forward, forward, back, it's really not so bad, and it looks really nice. I think it looks really, really nice. Okay, let me just check and make sure I'm caught up here. Ooh, we got more thoughts about double point needles. I'm sorry, I'm so backed up here with my reading my comments. Okay, Sandy says I can work with double point needles just fine. I was more interested in making the mittens. Okay. Okay, oh, and Suzanne is saying double point needles always slip out of the knitting, then you lose the stitches. Yeah, I know. It's the double point needles are especially tricky if you have to like stop what you're doing and go run around and chase the kids and then come back or whatever it is. If you're interrupted a lot, they could be frustrating. Hilda says, I like double point needles only for small starts. Oh, okay. Rounded lace or hats. Okay. Kathy says, I like double point needles, but just working this pattern the way you are working. Oh, okay. You're just going to do it this way. Okay. It'll be something different to switch it up. And Kate says, I love double point needles. Learned to make socks on double point needles 40 years ago, long before the magic loop and 2 circulars, but I have some really cute size 8 straight needles that I can use for this pattern. Thanks. Awesome. Okay. Yeah, and I feel like for me, the double point needle things, I really learned to love them more when I switched to stickier needles. I have some kind of, I can't remember the brand of them, but they're like a really textured plastic and they don't just slip out. And but they're slippery enough for me to knit with and not get frustrated. So for me, trying out different textures on the double point needles really improved how much I liked working with them. And just to be clear, I don't hate double point needles. I just really love straight needles. Like knitting things with straight needles is just really fun for me because I don't really do it that often. Okay, let's see. Oh, I also like circulars, and I think this would be okay to work this pattern also. Yes. Okay. You guys have a lot to say about the double point needles. That's awesome. I'm so glad you guys are so active in the chat. It makes me feel like I'm actually hanging out with you guys. Cindy says, very interested in this method as it's very approachable and low barrier to entry for this beginner. Thanks. Never used double point needles, just learned magic loop for my first time doing a small tube. The 2x2 ribbed fingerless knit I mentioned. Awesome. Cool. Yeah, and the magic loop, that's something that I didn't learn for a very long time, and it was just sort of like a little mind-blowing thing. So for those of you who haven't tried that yet, if you're not a big fan of double point needles, definitely give that a try and see if that works for you too. All right. I thank you guys so much for all these comments. I really appreciate it. I'm glad that you guys are here. I hope this was a helpful tutorial. Hope you guys enjoy making some of these mittens. And I hope to see you in the next one. If you guys have any suggestions for future live events, definitely let me know because I love hearing what you guys are interested in working on. And thank you guys so much for being here. If you guys make these for holiday gifts, I really hope that the recipient knows how much you love them. Thank you guys so much for being here. Bye, everyone.